I'm Michael Moreci, and this is the Filmographers podcast, the show where ordinarily Keir Graff and I study an entire director's career, one film at a time.
In season one, that director is Steven Soderbergh, but we also make time to watch and discuss movies by other directors currently playing in theaters. Today, we're going to talk about Robert Eggers' latest release, his remake of the 1922 F.W. Murnau classic Nosferatu.
We'll be looking at the history of Nosferatu. It's been remade more than once before taking a look at Eggers' brief yet fascinating filmography.
We'll also share our own reaction to the movie and discuss whether it qualifies as a Christmas movie or not. In fact, why don't we do that now? Mike, what do you think?
Well, it was released on Christmas Day. It takes place at Christmas. There's a scene that has a Christmas tree in it. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say on the Christmas movie scale, I'm going to give it a solid 3 out of 4 diehards.
Wow, good rating. But, I have to agree. I have to agree. And it's also the perfect movie for people who are wanting a little break from the sugar and sweetness of the holidays. And just like Santa, Nosferatu comes to your house whether you've been naughty or nice. Now, Mike, I know you've gone deep on Nosferatu. Why don't you start us out with a quick recap of the vamp, the myth, the legend?
Yeah, absolutely. But full disclosure before I begin, I am currently writing a Nosferatu graphic novel for Blaze Publishing. You can actually pre-order it now. We'll drop the link in the show notes. It's called the Book of Nosferatu. And that graphic novel, to be clear, has no connections to the Eggers version. It's actually tied to the Murnau version, set hundreds of years beforehand. So it is available, pre-order, check it out. But getting into the movie itself, speaking of Murnau, there's a really rich history to the 1922 German silent film, which was titled in full Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. Now, you might be thinking that the movie was released in 1922, which means it was released close to the seminal vampire novel Dracula by Bram Stoker, and you'd be right. Bram Stoker's Dracula was released in 1897, meaning that Nosferatu was released just 25 years later. Now, Murnau actually wanted to make Dracula into a film, and he was denied the rights from the Stoker estate, so he went and made the movie anyway, which is something you definitely cannot do. He changed a few details and he changed all the names, but nonetheless, you can't do that now. You couldn't do it in 1922. So a lawsuit ensued. Prana Film, which is the company that produced Nosferatu, was sued by Bram Stoker's heirs. And I say heirs because Bram Stoker actually died 10 years prior in 1912. So his heirs were controlling his estate. And they won. The heirs, Stoker's family won, and the lawsuit dictated, because Prana Film actually had no money, the lawsuit was that every print of the film had to be destroyed, which is an interesting court order that, like, I don't know what other consequences you can carry out for this kind of, copyright infringement, or, what copyright law was then, but it's very interesting to be like, we're just going to destroy the movie in its entirety. But however, despite the court order, like the vampire itself, the film was very hard to kill, and several prints of it survived. Now, this is not one of those cases where a film was lost for decades, or even in this case would be a generation or so, multiple generations, like the recent John Ford movie, which is discovered in all places in Chile 100 years after its creation, which I find is a fascinating. It's a fascinating thing here. Like, every couple years, I feel like we find one of these just missing films in somewhere in Chile or Ecuador or Russia. Something, these movies just pop up, and it's like, we got it, we found it. It's crazy. But anyway,
yeah, I think it gives us a lot of hope, for all these movies that are missing. That I mean, at some point they're going to run out, right? But as long as there are more discoveries to be made, we can cross our fingers and hope that some of the lost classics may resurface once again.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. I mean, there's so many legendary movies that are missing. The Magnificent Ambersons, the Orson Welles cut. There's, what is it, Night Falls Over London, another classic horror movie that's just legendary but gone. The full print of Phantom of the Opera. There's so many things that are out there that are just lost to time. So that said, this was not fully lost. There's reports that have, and I've actually doing some research, I found advertisements of it, of Nosferatu playing in London theaters in 1925. It made its way to the US by 1929. So it's basically still circulating, not fully, not widely, certainly not in Germany, but it's playing in other places. There's a lengthier story here, but the point is the movie survived, was preserved, like we were saying, that's not a luxury that many silent films that were afforded. And it was eventually wide released years and years later after the lawsuit, after the Stoker heirs had settled and things had gotten cleared up, and it endures to this day. It was remade in 1979 for the first time by Werner Herzog. His version was called Nosferatu the Vampire, vampire with a Y, not with an I, and it starred the infamously difficult Klaus Kinski. And it was again again remade in 2023 by director David Lee Fisher. It was a crowdfunding campaign. It starred Doug Jones, who, probably most famously played Abe Sapien in the Hellboy movies.
I did not see that one, Mike. Did you see that one?
I watched some of it last night. It's available. You can watch it for free on Pluto, Tubi. It's available on those services. So with some advertisements, but free to watch. And I didn't watch the entire thing, but it's interesting. It feels like more or less, from what I was able to glean, a shot for shot remake. It even looks like the sepia, weird tones and things like that of the original, but just with audible dialogue. So there's actually it's a talkie now. But I think, and I'm not certain. I think that was the tack that they took. It's like the Gus Van Sant Psycho, where it's just a shot for shot remake, but just with a little bit of twist that they added dialogue and a full score. Now, granted, there was a score to the Nosferatu. It was, an orchestral accompaniment, but this was actually, obviously in the movie itself.
Interesting. And yet less interesting, I think, than what we're going to be talking about today.
Yes, yes, and we're getting there. There's one more interesting take on Nosferatu, which is, in my opinion, the most interesting take, and that comes in the form of 2000's Shadow of the Vampire, a terrific and tragically almost forgotten film. It's never been available even on Blu-ray. It had a limited DVD release that is very hard to get. For obvious reasons, now has become very pricey because it's Nosferatu is probably elevating that. People want to see it. You can get it streaming, but it never really got a very proper, solid physical media release. I'm sure that's around the corner given Nosferatu's success. But that chronicles the making of the film, the fictionalized making of the film. Only in this version, Max Schreck, who's the actor who played Nosferatu / Count Orlock, he is an actual vampire who feasts on the cast and crew.
Talk about method acting.
Yeah, he really chewed the scenery, Keir, and the people standing close to the scenery.
I am so glad you brought that one up, though. I mean, I had almost forgotten about Shadow of the Vampire myself, but doing some research for today's episode and after rewatching the 2024 Nosferatu, I came across it and rewatched some scenes on YouTube and was just reminded like how much I loved it when it first came out. But you're right, it kind of sank without a trace.
Yeah, it did. And it's a great movie. I mean, John Malkovich plays F.W. Murnau. It's a really, really well-made movie. And there are actually two interesting tidbits to it that I wanted to bring up. The first is that it's written by Stephen Katz, who only has 4 writing credits to his name, one of which being Shadow of the Vampire, the other being 2 episodes of The Knick. So we have satisfied our 6 degrees of Steven Soderbergh game with Stephen Katz. Thank you, Mr. Katz.
I love that. And given how prolific Soderbergh is, actually, we could probably get it down to 4 or 5 degrees is my guess.
Yeah, we can get it pretty, like Soderbergh himself, pretty economical, I would imagine. 4 degrees of Steven Soderbergh. Take that, bacon. And second interesting tidbit is Max Schreck, who, like we said, Max Schreck is the real actor who played Nosferatu / Count Orlock. And in Shadow of the Vampire, Max Schreck was played by none other than Willem Dafoe, who stars in Robert Eggers' 2024 Nosferatu. So there you go.
And actually, when I first heard about this and I heard that Dafoe was in it, to be honest, I assumed he was going to play Nosferatu. Probably because of that, probably because of his distinctive, gaunt facial features. Instead, he plays a different role. Also terrific in this.
Yeah, he's magnificent. Yeah, we'll surely talk about that. The whole cast is absolutely stellar. But speaking, getting around to Eggers, Keir, can you give us some background information on the acclaimed director?
I will. But before I do, I just want to remind listeners and viewers to please subscribe to the Filmographers podcast, either on your podcasting platform of choice or on YouTube, and leave us a rating or review.
Yeah, in the spirit of Christmas, just please give us a few minutes of your time. Those ratings and reviews help us reach new audiences. It's the gift that you can give us. Just slide it under our tree. It's a little late, but that's okay. And it won't cost you a penny, just a few moments of your time. We really appreciate it.
And it's a gift that will give year round. Now on to Eggers. So this is, as we said at the top, we've been spending season one of the Filmographers profiling Steven Soderbergh, a guy who's made a lot of movies. We've been doing this podcast for what feels like forever. Eggers, this is only his fourth film, so I'm sure a lot of people know this, but for those who don't, The Witch was his debut in 2015, The Lighthouse in 2019, and Northman just 2 years ago in 2022. So four movies, all very distinctive. He's got a lot of fans, but some mixed reviews as well. So interestingly, Nosferatu was supposed to be his second film, and it was originally announced in 2015, the same year The Witch came out. And at the time, he was even quoted as sort of saying like it was maybe a little audacious, or maybe he was moving a little too fast to be tackling such a kind of iconic film so early in his career. But at the same time, he was very excited to do it. Then, for various reasons, he put the brakes on that, made a couple of other movies. Many years have passed. And, I think fortunately for us, he took some more time to mature as a director. But he had been interested in the story for a long time. He had actually directed it as a play in high school and also professionally. So it's something that he's very familiar with the material. Clearly, he's interested in the historical, right? When you look at his four films, we have a film set in the 1630s and Puritan times. We have a film set in the 1890s, kind of the Gilded Age, but definitely not set in the gilded part of the Gilded Age. We have a film set in 895, the Viking era, and then this film, which is set in 1830.
Yeah, it's the year 1900 it is his Rubicon. Like he just will not cross that. He will not cross into the 20th century.
It certainly seems that way. He got his start doing some production design, not on huge films, but on some short films and a couple of smaller films. And I think that really shows in his directorial style. Like he's somebody maybe like Tim Burton, somebody we might talk about again later, who really, really has a look and feel that he wants to achieve. He goes to great lengths to ensure kind of historical accuracy, sometimes even in the speech of the characters. But when he whether he's shooting in a Puritan compound or he's shooting in 1800s Germany or whatever, it just looks and feels amazing. So he's very, very visually focused, as a director should be. He has also written or co-written all of his films, and he has served as producer on all but the first. So he is clearly somebody who craves control. And like our man Soderbergh, he even though it's early in his career, he clearly has shown that he's somebody who likes to work again with the same people. If he likes them, if he finds something about them that he's cast them in one movie, it's quite possible he'll bring them back again. Ralph Ineson, Anya Taylor-Joy, and Willem Dafoe are all repeat collaborators, but also some of the folks behind the camera. Cinematographer Jaron Blaschke and editor Louise Ford are people he's worked with repeatedly. And Taylor-Joy was originally cast to be the female lead in Nosferatu too, but dropped out probably because it was taking forever to get made and her career was going new places. Eggers also likes him a Skarsgård. Alexander Skarsgård was in The Northman, and Bill Skarsgård was in Nosferatu. So I'm fingers crossed that he'll work with their dad Stellan in the next film.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I mean, I love the Skarsgårds as well, and they've done well by him. Even though we'll talk, I have mixed feelings about The Northman. He was terrific in that.
I do like the Skarsgård clan. I mean, what an acting dynasty, and what interesting actors with interesting roles. Pretty cool. So the cast of Nosferatu features Bill Skarsgård as Orlock, the Dracula character, as Mike was talking about the parallels up top. Nicholas Hoult as Thomas Hutter, who's the Harker character. Lily Rose Depp as the cursed Ellen Hutter, who is the Mina Harker character. I love that Hutter and Harker, pretty close.
Pretty good, getting there.
Uh, Willem
Who can
Dafoe
sue
is,
over that, Kier?
yeah, I mean, there's no similarity. It's all in your head. A state of Bram Stoker. Willem Dafoe plays Professor Alban Eberhard von Franz, your Van Helsing. Ralph Ineson is Dr. Sievers, aka Dr. Seward. I mean, yeah. And Simon McBurney in a very nice turn as Herr Knock, who is the Renfield of Nosferatu.
Which, by the way, sorry to interrupt really quick.
Yeah.
Last year, our boy Nicholas Hoult starred in a movie called Renfield with Nicolas Cage. And he played.
Which was a very enjoyable film. I liked it.
I actually never saw it. I should.
Not a classic, but very enjoyable. Yeah, and Holt has been busy this year, right? We've seen him in Juror Number 2, which just came out, and The Order, which just came out, right? This guy's like, he saved all his movies for like the same 5-week period.
Yeah, good for him. Good for him. The child actor done right. I'm really he's really good too. I really like him a lot. He does. We were talking before the show. He takes on really interesting roles, and I like to see him continue to grow and mature, and take the bigger roles like a Nosferatu, which is it's a Christmas Day release. That's a big deal, but also still take the chances and play a white supremacist in movies like The Order.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, speaking of the child actor, who's pulling together a great career, like I've never seen him in any tawdry headlines. As far as I know, he hasn't turned over a car well addled on drugs. So good for you, Nicholas Hoult.
Yeah. Hey, not bad. Not bad. Not every child actor has that kind of success story. So
that we know. So anyway, before we get into the meat of it, the Nosferatu was filmed February through May of last year, had a wide release on Christmas Day, a very wide release for an Eggers film, and it sold a lot more tickets than anticipated. So it's doing really well. But now that we've kind of given the filmographers rundown, Mike, did you like it?
Yes, I very much did. But in order to give the reasons why, I have to give a little bit more historical context. So I got to kind of like draw us back just a little for a moment, and I got to talk about German Impressionism. These films of the silent films of Germany at this time, early 1920s up until like mid to late 1920s. Films like Nosferatu, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Fritz Lang, and Metropolis, or M came a little bit later. But basically, what you have here is this is the post World War I Germany and post World War Europe. And the context for this is something that's really fascinating. It's a really fascinating time in history, and it's a really fascinating time for film, because you have in this period the more death than humanity's ever experienced before. In World War I, you have the proliferation and of automatic weaponry. And you have the advent and proliferation of chemical warfare, which were two things that were killing people. I mean, literally by the millions. World War I don't know what the death toll is, in the tens of millions, I believe, Keir, if I'm not mistaken. Very
big.
high.
I'm going to go with big.
Go big. Very high.
Yeah.
So you have, I mean, you look at the numbers, it's hard to even wrap your head around. But the reality is, because of all these deaths across Europe, you have like literally towns. You have provincial towns. You have very, early towns still living more or less in like the late, 19th century. Entire towns decimated, like the entire male population gone. And then the town just dying because of, you need to continue to, increase the population, extend the bloodlines, things like that. You need to have children, basically. And you have entire towns that just go away. You have generation of men who just don't come home or who do come home disfigured. The horrors of disfigurement, World War One. I've read a lot about this. Are because of exposure to gas, to bullet wounds, missing limbs. They're also, I mean, on the plus side, there's also advances in surgery, field surgery, and the medicine and things they have then, which is kind of goes adjacent to the Nick, which takes place a few years before World War One, where they're advancing surgery and all these other things, medical technology, so they're able to save lives, but they're also able to save lives that are mangled. So you have this ghostly, ghastly generation of men who do return home, who are, either mentally disfigured, suffering from, and I don't mean to say that in a bad way, but suffering from PTSD, emotional
Yeah.
trauma, or physically disfigurement. So it is a haunted, horrifying generation that dealt with this mass death across Europe. So when you get to then the films of this period, this this is just a matter of years after the end of World War One that are starting to explore the horrors of the war and the horrors of the post-war. And that is a lot of what these German films are tapping into. They're dark, and they are, the shadows, the Caligari is basically a harbinger of death as well, and a dealer of death, and which, long story short, bringing us to Nosferatu, the thing that distinguishes Nosferatu from Dracula, and Eggers taps into this well too, the thing that distinguishes it really well is that Dracula, like in the book, Dracula is death. That is true. Bram Stoker writes him that way. But Nosferatu takes it, the 1922 Nosferatu takes it in a really new and interesting direction that, like, really, he is the plague. He is just a creature. He is this disformed, nasty, gnarly, dark dwelling thing. It is a far cry from the eventual Dracula adaptation that we get, the Todd Browning Dracula adaptation with Bela Lugosi, where he is a human who happens to be a vampire as well. Count
A
Orlock.
human in amazing evening dress and,
Yeah,
very cultivated, very cultured,
goes out for a
just
night on
like
the town,
yeah,
goes to the
a
opera.
gentleman with some big teeth.
Yeah, looks great in his black tie affairs, like he
Yeah.
can, you know, um and there's, I mean, look, I love the Bela Lugosi Dracula, don't get me wrong, but there is humanity there to some degree. He is a recognizable person. Nosferatu slash Count Orlock is not a person. He is a thing. He is a creature of darkness. He is death. He is the plague. And that is a reflection of what Europe was experiencing, what Germany was experiencing post-World War, was just that this thing had swept across Europe, killed millions, disfigured others, left people shells of themselves. And that is what Nosferatu is a metaphor, a representation, whatever you want to call it, of death. He is just death. He is just a creature of death and nothing more. And that's all he is. Now, I'm going to table that for a second and get back to that because I'm going to circle around to this point. The problem that I've had with Eggers movies, and we talked about this a little bit here, is that sometimes I love The Witch. I think The Witch had serious vigor of a first-time filmmaker. He had an announcement of a unique voice. It's so well made. I adore The Witch. I don't like The Lighthouse that much, and The Northman I find pretty much forgettable. They're still really well crafted movie, but that is where the problem lies, is that like a Wes Anderson, and people have made this comparison before. I'm not the first, and you mentioned Tim Burton when we discussed this yesterday. He sometimes falls in love with the pageantry a little bit too much, where it feels like he's just moving these characters around in his elaborately designed pieces. And the design is wonderful. The detail is amazing. But there has felt in the Lighthouse and in Northman, I don't say lifeless because that feels very harsh. They feel very impersonal. They feel very, very impersonal to me. And in the first 40 minutes of Nosferatu, that's how I was feeling as well. I was like, wow, he's really just doing Nosferatu, because it is very, very faithful and in a good way. But I had this feeling that's like, wow, it's another Eggers pageant, where everything
Hmm.
looks great, everything is lavishly designed, and it feels like 18 whatever, 1800 whatever, and he paints, in the Northman, I guess what the year 827 will look like, I don't know, but like
890, yeah.
890, I guess. But um but like it all looks how it's supposed to look. It's just the character and the emotion that for me in those two films felt very flat and very, like I said, impersonal. And I have that dreadful feeling in Nosferatu that we're getting that again until it changes. And what this ends up being, and I've been thinking of this long into the night, the way The Dark Knight for me is probably the best post 9/11 movie. This might be the best post COVID movie, where it's so much about like so much of the movie is about characters reacting to like, God, how much death can we endure? How much suffering can we endure? When will this end? When will this sadness? And these characters become so, and the performances are so good, and these characters become so rich as everything is dying and wilting and just withering around them. What Nicholas Hoult endures and Lily Rose Depp and Aaron Taylor Johnson, I forget his wife's name, who's also terrific. They're just experiencing all this just relentless kind of plague-like situation, which eventually becomes the plague, just like Nosferatu, as the rats arrive on the
Yeah.
ship. The name of the ship is escaping the Demeter. I don't think they call it the Demeter in Nosferatu. Maybe they call it the Blemeter or something like that. But like, um, it hit me. It hit me pretty hard, and it hit me in other ways too, which we'll talk about. But what I feel like Murnau did with capturing that post-war feeling of death and dread, and mainly the sadness of seeing all the death and dread. I feel like Eggers captured here for COVID of like, it feels like long ago. It really wasn't that long ago. I think it's the gap of time between the end of COVID. I put that in quotes, but the end of like lockdown and stuff like that till now, and the end of World War I to Nosferatu is like 3 or 4 years. It's basically the same
Yeah.
amount of time. And I feel like he
Yeah.
really captures that deep, deep sadness that I had forgotten, to be honest. And that's what you do with trauma. You forget, and I'm not, look, I mean, I did get COVID. I got COVID like 3 or 4 times. But
I still have COVID.
we all have, yeah, I think we're all
Yeah.
just, it's incubating inside of us. But like, I was fortunate not to lose anybody close to me, thank God.
Yeah.
But we all experienced the desolation of our towns. We go outside and nobody's there, and it's empty, and there's this pervasive sadness and missing people, and we can't be near people, and all this kind of is very, very difficult. And I think he just captured that in Nosferatu. It elevated it. The production design is already an A plus plus plus. The performances too, but where he was lacking that emotional core, that resonance that I felt like lacked in Lighthouse and Northman, he absolutely captured Nosferatu, elevates it to an absolutely terrific movie. I loved it. I can't wait to see it again. So yes, big thumbs up from me. Keir, how about you?
Mike, that was so eloquent and so thoughtful and so deep. It really puts to shame my lame joke. I was gonna say something about how like Dracula is like the Beatles and Nosferatu's like the Stones, but let's move beyond that.
Well, now we have to. Are you a Beatles man or a Stones man?
Oh, I'm a Stones guy. I mean, I appreciate the Beatles, but definitely like, it's like you've got the Dracula is like the sanitized, clean version, and as the Beatles were. I mean, they got weirder and more interesting as their career went along. But like the Stones were like kind of the grungy, dirty, slightly scary, dabbled with the devil kind of thing. And Nosferatu was, I mean, no, you absolutely capture that. Like Nosferatu is like a shape, a thing, a monster, a force, rats. It's nasty, and Eggers leans into that. Like you, I have had really mixed feelings about Eggers. I liked The Witch. I don't think I liked it as much as you did. It felt to me like a terrific debut, to be sure, but it felt like it had a pacing problem for me. It was a little episodic. Um, I think that he could have landed the ending even harder and made it more like a heretic type ending or something. It was almost there. But anyway, that was definitely a terrific Arrival movie. But I'm so glad he didn't make Nosferatu right after that because I don't think he was ready. Uh, Shamefully, I have to admit that I didn't haven't seen The Lighthouse yet. I have seen the Northman, and yeah, The Northman is a terrific looking film that didn't leave much of a mark for me. It didn't have any emotional core. And you were saying that his films felt impersonal, which is interesting to me because I think that his films are deeply personal, but the problem is they're deeply personal to him, and they're not accessible to the rest of us, which maybe makes it harder for us to connect to them. Like he's got such a like a Wes Anderson, like a Burton, like he's so much up in his own head, and he's so obsessed with his realizing his vision of what this movie should look like that he forgets to create characters that the rest of us can connect with. And I think that has been a problem with his previous three films for sure. And this one, I still don't think he completely solved that problem, but I think he doesn't need to as much because it's a known horror property. We all know the story, and it's much more about, I mean, as you said, it's almost by making it more epic and bigger and more about big, huge fears and things. We don't need the individual characters to be our way in quite as much. But that said, um, as the film goes on, I began to identify more and more with our Harker stand-ins, and the people who are struggling in this world. I think that he really pulls off his pacing. It's the best pacing he's gotten, and that's
Yeah.
so important. He really develops this sense of just relentless creeping dread, like you were talking about. It's just smothering and oppressive, and that is something we also need. This sense that his arrival, that Orlock's arrival, is something to be terrified of. I mean, he nails that. And when the ship lands and the rats are streaming off the ship, and we're just like, holy shit, like it's all going down. Like he totally nails that. I think we also have to judge it, based on what he does with Orlock, because I mean that's the character. Like, what's his take on Orlock? Does he have something new to say, or is he going to kind of, you know, pay homage to those that came before? And I think he does a nice job of kind of paying homage and yet making a new monster, because the skeletal, gaunt, rat-like Nosferatu, I particularly think about like Klaus Kinski's teeth in that version. Um,
Yes.
so that, I mean, that was a great touch, but like he doesn't go with that version so much as this hulking, shadowy force that is, we hear the voice is almost more of a presence in the initial encounters than the physicality. He does a lot of great German expressionist stuff with the shadows, the hand that reaches up to the doorknob and then the doorknob turns almost of its own volition.
So cool.
Stuff like, oh, he's over here. No, he's over here. He pays homage to, one, as we discussed, as you said, you've seen the original more recently than me. He pays homage to the great staircase scene. He also has the classic, coach going up to the castle scene that really did recall the Coppola version for me. But aside from a couple tips of the hat, he follows the story very closely, but it felt like visually he was charting his own course a lot. We talked about Guy Madden yesterday after watching it. It's ironic to me that Guy Madden this year came out with a film whose name is so forgettable to me, Rumors, that is like not a Guy Madden movie. I feel like this is the movie Guy Madden, if he was a little more into horror, would have made had somebody given him a proper budget, because it just has that reek of authenticity. It's almost, if story aside, you could just kind of wander those streets in your mind forever because it looks so phenomenal. Um, I'm rambling a little bit, but I guess this is all just by way of saying, like, to me, it succeeded on every level. I was excited walking out of the theater. The more I think about it, the more I like it. I'm ready to go see it again. It was so good that despite the fact that I was seated next to somebody who broke all the rules of theater going, unwrapped hard candy, used her phone, fell asleep and snored, it still didn't ruin the movie for me. So I think that shows you a little something about how good the movie was.
You're owed a private screening, and you're owed. I owe you one because you shielded me from that, because I had no idea that was going on. I was beside you, and I had no idea that was
I was
happening.
I was your buffer.
You
Yeah.
were. Yeah, I would have. I have no patience for that. Bad things would have happened. So it's good that I didn't. Um, but I do have a question for you that I was thinking about as you were talking. I agree on all your points. I can't wait to see it again. And I'm going to see it again. Um, so do you think here's the do you think that Egger should have taken more chances? Because besides, like we said, we joked when we came out of the movie that like basically there's a different beginning, and I won't spoil it. I don't want to get into what the beginning is. It's like basically like a missing reel of the
Yeah,
original
yeah.
Murnau movie involving Lily Rose Depp that gives new context to her character and her relationship to Nosferatu, which is really interesting, and I really like it because that the relationship does exist in the original. I've seen it now writing the graphic novel. I've watched that movie many times this year. I know it very well. Um, and that relationship does exist, but they really made it apparent. And by the way, I think I said German. Did I say German impressionism? I think I did. I meant
You
expressionism.
started to and you stopped yourself. So
Yeah, forgive
yeah.
forgive the gaffe there. German expressionism. But that said, it's very much Nosferatu. Like it is the movie. So do you think Egger should have taken more risks, or were you glad to be like, no, just make it again?
I was okay with that because, yeah, and it's always tough with something like this that's 100 years old and looms so large, and everybody's certainly the collective psyche of horror fans. Uh, you steer too far afield, I think you're risking a little bit of backlash. But in a way, I love it because it's sort of like, to me, it's like the ultimate Nosferatu movie because it takes the original premise and just fully realizes it. But I do think that that opening is such a key addition because what it does is it takes, so often in these films, the heroines, the female leads are these kind of like, whatever, like blood farms. I mean, they're shrinking blood donors who don't have a whole lot to do with the story. And in fact, she's much more centered in the story than the existing versions of Dracula and Nosferatu. She's much more interesting. She's much more like a she's not a femme fatale, but she's a really fated character who has a complex psychology and a complex role to play, and becomes much more interesting than her Harker hubby stand-in. Honestly,
Yeah.
Holt is great, but he's not nearly as interesting to watch as Lily Rose Depp.
Yeah, I agree because I think that the only thing that we've managed to do like with that character throughout history is like make her like a vampire hunter or something like that. Like, oh, she survived and she becomes like the vampire hunter. And it's kind of lame. I think this gave her actual dimensions and depth that didn't really exist in the Mina Harker or whatever she's called in this. Really adds a layer to that relationship. And it explores the point, of like how, it seems like the thing that resonates, like going back to the COVID thing, but COVID or not, the thing that resonates with the Dracula character when done well and what really works for Nosferatu is that how do you live with death on your shoulder? Death will come for us all. We don't know how, we don't know when. And
Speak for
that's
yourself.
unless there's a final destination situation going on, Kira. um, and it's that is the terror of life, and the representation of that is Orlock, is Nosferatu, and it's just dramatized with the Mina character, with all the characters. The greatest, but going back specifically to the Lily Rose Depp character, it's everything you said, and I love that. I mean, the greatest thing I feel like that writers can oftentimes do is just take the mythology or take the story, whatever you want to call it, and just give it that little tweak. In comics, Alan Moore was the master of this. I always go back and think back on his Swamp Thing, where the original Swamp Thing, prior to Alan Moore taking over, was Swamp Thing was a monster who thought he was a man. And Alan Moore was like, or no, he was. Yeah. And Alan Moore tweaked it. It's like, no, no, he never was a man. He is a monster. No, he was originally it was like he was a man who turned into a monster. And as the monster, he thought like, I just need to get back to being, I need to get back to being a man. And Alan Moore's like, no, 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 he never was a man. He dreamed that he was a man. And it just this
Yeah.
little tweak that like that's reframes the entire story is that he is not a man. He is the monster who just has a little bit of humanity now in him because of, his origin story. And it's brilliant. It just changed the entire Swamp Thing mythos, made it way more interesting, way more complicated, gave new depth to all his relationships, and his run is very Eggers like. I mean, I can see Eggers actually making a Swamp Thing movie very easily. Um,
Yeah.
that said, same thing here. Like just this little bit of a tweak and added some layers to this character, to Lily Rose Depp's character, who I'm sorry, I keep wanting to say Harker, but it's not Mina. She's Ellen Hutter. Ellen Hutter.
Hut.
Yeah. So changing that reframes almost the entire thing in a certain way. So yes, it is very much the 1922 version. Minus one, I miss the scene where I don't know if you recall this, another iconic scene, which is I guess it's in a way would be too much of a wink or a nod where I don't know how Murnau filmed this, but basically it's Hutter, or I'm sorry, not Hutter, it's Orlock loading his own caskets onto the carriage as he's leaving his castle. Like you see you see them loading themselves. It's really cool. It's
Yeah.
eerie, but
Yeah.
he doesn't do that. But anyway, but that aside, it's basically that movie. He basically made the 1922 version over again, very, very similar, with some new little bit of tweaks and a little bit of flourishes, like you said, with the hand. And I mean, it's not a shot for shot by any means, but like
Yeah.
just that little bit that he did makes it distinct and unique enough in my mind.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And just giving her character, I mean, in a way, she doesn't have a lot more agency because, well, I guess she has more agency because of what happens in the first scene, but like she's still constricted by the rules of her society, and she's still like a guest in the house of a very domineering man, and yada yada yada. But there's just a lot more beneath the surface. There's like female desire, and there's um emotionality, and there's like, they don't try to turn into like a sexy vampire movie. In fact, like there's a lot of kind of like intriguing stuff that's like sexuality that is tied into like hunger and like the blood feeding and stuff, which is classic in vampire movies, but is there are also a couple of moments of genuine attraction and intimacy between the characters that you don't normally see in the classic Dracula films. So like that kind of updates nicely as well. I mean, so do you feel like that one tweak was enough? Or would you have liked to see him go a little further and try some more stuff?
No, I think it was exactly what it needed. It
Yeah.
gives us everything that we would want in a because the Werner Herzog version is quite different. If you want to see a different exploration, which is similarly exploring some of the psychosexual stuff, but it's quite different, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But this gives us a really, this is like we said, a movie that's 102 years old. So I think it's fair game to do this kind of really faithful updating, but updating it with a new context. This is what he gave it. And there is other things that we can unpack here. That if we had, you could do a lot about this, the psychosexual drama. You can do a lot about the sexuality. You can do a lot about how, the inner relationship that is so familiar to vampire movies of sex and death, because sex is,
Yeah.
can lead to birth and lead to life. But it's also tied to, in this case, to like that life eventually leads to death. That's where all paths lead. And there is no redemption here. It's not like again, like so many romanticized vampires, like if I just have my love, I'll be freed or whatever. I'll be, freed of the curse of the vampire. I'll still be a vampire, but you know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
this isn't like that. Like it's just gnarly. It's just full appetite, as he says himself. I think he says, I am appetite. It's all appetite. That's all it is. And it's really fascinating and brilliant that they kept it so base and so simple and so clear and so kind of nasty in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nasty. Well, before we go, I just want to quickly shout out to Willem Dafoe, the man we mentioned a little bit earlier too. Like I I think that we haven't really said much about his performance. His performance as the Van Helsing stand-in. I loved him. He's such a delight to watch. And particularly one of the things, so my son Cosmo, who watched the movie with us, I thought he had a really nice observation, which was that he said, I like how he doesn't know all the answers, because so often in these vampire movies, people kind of lay things out like, well, the rules are this, he can't be seen by, kill him with a silver bullet or whatever. And that I would say that this is already present in the Nosferatu story, but I think that Eggers did a nice job of kind of like steeping us in the unknown. And here's a man he's a discredited man of science because he's come to believe in the occult, and he's super knowledgeable, and that's why they turn to him. But he still confesses kind of readily, like, well, I don't know, I've never encountered one of these guys before, and it's just very refreshing. And his this I don't want to give anything away, but like his final scene that we get with him when they're during the confrontation at the coffin, and he's kind of like exulting in what they're doing. I loved him so much. Long live Willem Dafoe. I'm glad that he's one of Eggers's many muses.
Yeah, and there's so much that you can do, like going to your point really quickly about like him not having answers. There's a lot of, and I'm sure there is you can make an annotated version of this movie, cover to start to finish, because one of the interesting things is that, and I won't say what exactly, but there is a vampire scene in it where the people unearth a vampire that's not Nosferatu, and they put a metal sword or stake through it. It's not a wooden stake. And the mythology of that time was that that's what was the practice, according to mythology, to get rid of vampires, because it wasn't about like putting a wooden stake through the heart. It was you'd stake them to the ground so they couldn't move. So that's what they were doing. They're putting this pole through. It doesn't like the vampire doesn't burst into flames. It doesn't turn to ash.
Yeah.
Nothing happens, but they just can't go anywhere. Because that's the point, unless they get into sunlight. So maybe that's the point, is that you stake them to the ground, the sun comes out, takes care of business. But that is what they were doing there, because that is more of the folklore, the occult, which this taps into really well, which I loved, part of Nosferatu, which very much exists in Nosferatu, the 1922 version, that like there is all this weird occult stuff in that movie. Hutter takes out this letter from Nosferatu. There's a scene, look it up, that's just this writing in occult language. It's very creepy. There's other occult mentions. The Harker character finds a book about killing vampires that's filled with occult stuff. There's a mention of werewolves. They mention werewolves in the movie. So there's all this dark occult stuff going on that Eggers really, really gets and taps into. That's very much part of this movie.
Yeah, and staking them down so they can't move is so much scarier and creepier than like putting a wooden stake through their heart and then they turn into dust. I mean, it's just yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, because it makes more sense. You hold them there, the sun comes out, and that's it. Like, why does wood kill them?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, wood. Come on,
they sleep in wood coffins.
Well, I think that's all for me. Anything else you want to add?
No, I just hope people go see it. See it. I urge people to see it on big screen. I think it's definitely worth the experience. The sound is amazing. Something we didn't mention, like the Orlock voice is terrific. And excuse me, I need to see it again. I don't think we ever see him speak. I think it's always off camera and like this like panoramic surround, like it's just oppressing you with his booming, I don't know how to say it, this 3D voice, that's like, but I don't think we ever see him talk clearly.
That's a good point. I am not sure either, but you are absolutely right. That voice is like, I'll hear it in my dreams. It's just so like coming out of everywhere and nowhere at once, and so creepy, ancient and terrifying. Yes, excellent sound design. See it in the theater, see it on a big screen, the biggest screen you possibly can. So whether you listened to this episode or watched it on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for making it a great year on the Filmographers podcast. This will be our last episode of 2024, but we will be back very soon with something new our very first interview.
Yeah, and trust us, it is a good one. We'll be talking to none other than Chris Sullivan, the star of the upcoming Soderbergh movie Presence. He also starred in The Knick, and probably most famous, you might know him best from the NBC drama This Is Us. Listeners, viewers, if you've enjoyed this episode, or any of our episodes, please, like we said before, please take a brief few seconds to show your support. Subscribe to the show, like the episode, give us a comment, or best of all, write us a review on your platform of choice.
And share your thoughts on Nosferatu. We want to hear them. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and X, or just send us a good old-fashioned email at thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, we'd really love to hear from you. We'll read it on the air. We'll have some fun with it. Whether it's a Soderbergh movie or, like Keir said, Nosferatu. We're really invested in this movie. I think we're both seeing it again, so we'd love to keep the conversation going. As always, huge thanks to Kevin Lau, our producer, Gompson, who composed and played our theme music, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo.
Thanks for joining us on The Filmographers Go to the Movies.